I'm starting to feel happy. One more presentation before the panel, and it's probably the last one I will announce. We're going to have Ms. Ann Barker from the National Research Council of Canada Arctic Program, where she's the leader, talk to us about the Canadian Arctic Shipping Risk Assessment System, or CASRAS.
Thank you, Pablo. You're just happy that's my presentation, aren't you?
Exactly.
So thank you very much to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today. I get the privilege of being the last full presentation, I guess, of the symposium. And it is a privilege because I get to hopefully leave you with a lasting message about what I feel is the importance of taking all of the phenomenal scientific data that is out there in the Arctic, and like the previous presentation and some of the other earlier ones we've heard this over the symposium, taking that data and getting it incorporated into tools and technologies that will make Arctic shipping safer, greener, and more efficient going forwards. So I am going to start with giving you a super quick whirlwind tour of what the National Research Council of Canada is. We've never attended this symposium before, and so you may be wondering who the heck I am and who do I work for. We'll talk a little bit about risk and why we care about it, and then another whirlwind tour of CASRAS, the Canadian Arctic Risk Assessment Shipping System. And then if you want to hear more, which I hope you do, how to do that. So, are we going? There we go. The National Research Council of Canada, it's the Government of Canada's federal research and technology organization. So we do research. And we develop and deploy solutions, as you can see, for our mission to meet Canada's current and future societal and industrial needs. And we do that through a number of ways. We provide innovation support for small and medium enterprises to conduct their own research, and that's a granting program. But then we also do scientific strategic research as well, and technical services. The picture you can see in the background is our ice tank in St. John's. We're actually at the moment, we're undergoing representative testing for the U.S. Polar icebreaker right now, and over the past couple of months that's been ongoing there. So it's a great collaboration with the U.S. Coast Guard. NRC is coast to coast, unfortunately not coast going north. We do a lot of research there, but our facilities are scattered throughout Canada. Any of the red dots are large facilities. And we're about a $1 billion in expenditure organization, so it's like $100 US, I'm sure, but it's, it gets us where we need to be. And we have just under 4,000 full-time staff, many of whom are researchers and technical officers helping to carry out that R&D. And we do that through programs, and we have about 40-odd programs. They come and go, they're time delimited, and 3 of the relevant ones for this symposium are our Marine Vehicles program, which is where the U.S. Icebreaker co-research is happening. We also have a Marine Infrastructure, Energy and Water Resources program, and then the program that I lead, which is the Arctic program. And that's where the project that I'm going to talk to you today about is housed. So who cares about risk assessment? I'm probably talking to a room full of people who also sympathize and understand the importance of risk. But just to remind you of why we care about risk, I'm an engineer by trade, and so that's pretty much what we deal in all the time. It's uncertainty. And so we are looking at things like environmental change that's coming, regulatory change, the Polar Code, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of minutes. Operational changes that can occur, different needs that develop as we move forward with new fleets, new crews, technology changes, and we hope there's technology changes. We don't necessarily want to see the same thing when we designed vessels 40 years ago. It's great that they are still in service, but what are new things that can help us going forward? And of course, unfortunately, if there are incidents, that also drives risk and why we need to look at it. So talking about the Polar Code, there are some specific requirements now that have come into play, and as that gets implemented, we're looking at things like identifying hazards. You know, how can we create this operational risk assessment, and what can we do going forward to make sure that vessels in the Arctic are compliant with that? So that's where CASRAS comes in. So this is a project that's been underway for 4 years at the National Research Council, and it's based on a platform that was actually developed back in 1997 at the National Research Council, and in turn has been used for things like hydrologic modeling, but also more recently part of a I think it's now 12 years underway, a joint industry project for the Beaufort Sea, where we created a Beaufort Sea engineering database with our partners at Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada, Imperial Oil, Exxon, BP, ConocoPhillips, the National Energy Board in Canada, and the Canadian Ice Service, to look and bring together a whole lot of data in one place so that everyone from regulators to operators to, and also local communities were working with the same set of information. So that's where CASRAS now comes into more of a marine shipping concept. So again, we've heard a lot about, databases of databases, and that's effectively, in a nutshell, what CASRAS is. And it's now operation specific. As you can see here, we're looking for, it's got to be relevant and it's got to be defensible data that we can use for defined shipping scenarios. So why do we want to develop it? Again, we want to come back to assessing risk. We want to look at how do we apply the Polar Code? How do we actually implement that in practice? We also were very keen on documenting knowledge. Certainly in Canada, a lot of our very experienced Coast Guard captains in particular have retired or are retiring. And we wanted to make sure that we get that decades worth of experience documented for knowledge transfer purposes. And also, it is very, very important that our local community information is also available in that system. Of course, as was mentioned, this data is scattered all over the place, and it's also in very different formats. We can have time varying, geographic varying data, we can have text-based data, we could have pictures. How do you pull all that together into one data set that can be very, very simply acquired? And the reason why it needs to be simply acquired is that we want this on board vessels. So it needs to be used in the Arctic as well as back in the office. So as we know and as we've heard, that's going to be a problem if you're reliant on internet service, at least right now. And so how can we make sure that you can do those risk assessments, you can do those calculations on board, on the fly, on board on a vessel when you're in the high north? So I'm not going to talk about this one too much, but you can see there, there's a number of different ways that we envision this tool to be used. And again, everything from planning, really back at the beginning to say, we think we're going to do operations in this region. What kind of vessel do we need? What are we going to encounter? What should we be considering? All the way through to we're on board a vessel, we're in the Arctic. What can we expect as we're going through on a planned route? Who should use the system? I want everybody to use this system. So I'm of course biased, but we do want it to be in the hands of a lot of people. We're working very closely with Transport Canada and the Canadian Coast Guard, as well as the World Wildlife Fund, to look at how can this tool be accessible. Certainly it was originally envisioned as a licensed model built for industry. And so it was, again, that was who our end user was. But as we've had more and more discussions, we've seen a broader and broader range of interest in it. And so now we're looking at how maybe some different delivery models still to be worked out. So this framework, and thank you to to ABS, the American Bureau of Shipping, this is based on a great document that they've put out about assessing risk. And this is the framework that's behind CASRAS, and so how we're trying to pull it together. And what is being pulled together. And in a nutshell, again, like the other systems that we've heard of, we're really looking at, we've got all this disparate data, let's pull it together, let's figure out a way of querying it, solving some problems with it, and then popping out some type of report. And that report's customized to the end user, because if you're a commercial shipping agency, if you're a Coast Guard, if you're a local community, you're not all going to want the same report. So we can't really standardize that. It's got to be customized at the end of the day. So there is some effort involved there. So this is just kind of a quick screenshot of CASRAS, and it does have multiple data sets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a couple of scenarios. So first of all, let's look at a risk assessment report. And what does that look like? Again, if you were trying to provide, say, your insurance company with, here's the information you need to assess whether or not I'm meeting Polar Code requirements before I go up into the Arctic. So we select that. And we go in and we're going to use an example of going to Milne Inlet, which is one of the mining locations in the Canadian North. So we're going to select Milne Inlet. And I should have brought my glasses because I really can't see, and then I would have got a wipe. But we're going to look in and we're going to select all the data. So we're just going to say, well, I just want to know what's up there. And we're going to select our route and figure out where we're going to go. And here's our route. So we're going to go from Baffin Bay to Milne Inlet. As we go in, we're going to select some risk modules. What do we want to see? And then we decide, do we want a printable PDF version, or is it something that we're going to use because we happen to know, oh, today we've got internet access because we're in port, then I can use Google Maps and overlay it with other tools. But if I'm not, then well, forget it. I just want something that's straightforward and printable. So this is what the report looks like. This is just a quick overview of the route. Again, tiny, tiny font. Won't be so tiny if you print it out. We can look at things like the mean ice concentration by month. So how does that change over our route as we go through? And again, this particular report is looking at all the data for all the years. We can look at the frequency of open water along that route and how that would affect us. We can look at historical max ice thickness along the route. We can look at ice navigability. So if we know what type of vessel we're already going to use, we can look at when would we or would we not be compliant with ice numerals as we go through. With the polar code, we also need to look at the polar surface temperature, so we can look at things, again, are we compliant with that as we're going through on this particular route. And again, if we were someplace where we had internet, we could also look at online reports and use other data sets that we could overlay. So what if you just want to play with the data? You're either back in the office or, again, maybe you're on board the vessel and you want to look at what's coming up. So then we just want to explore the data. So we go in and we're able to search through numerous data sets to see what we want to find. We can also look at it by different time periods. So again, maybe we want all of the data. Maybe we want just 2008 to 2011. Maybe we want only the month of May during these particular years, or maybe we want September, May, and I don't know, July of these intervals. And we can do all that and pick it all through. So you get the report that you need. We then select a route, and again, we can either put that in or we can do it manually. So we'll take this route. And then, again, we start looking through what kind of corridor width do we want to put in here. So again, this ties into some of the work that Transport Canada has been doing on their National Marine Corridor System. So in this case, we're going to look at a 5.5 nautical mile buffer for our route. And then we execute our search, and we get some different types of things. In this case, it's we've asked for the bathymetry, freely available bathymetry. In this case, it's the ArcticNet base maps that are available. If you are a subscriber and you get Canadian Hydrographic Service charts, for example, or if you have your own proprietary charts, the system can be customized to read those in. We don't provide CHS charts because those are a user pay product, so they cannot be input here, but if you yourself are a subscriber, then they could be included. We can do some analysis looking at things like maximum daily wind gust for our area of interest. We can look at the time-varying data. So again, this is wind again, but it could be other things like tides, snow, ice. And as I mentioned earlier, very importantly is the community information that is in this system. So in this particular case, we've pulled up the Nunavut Land Use Plan. And so we note that in this particular route, we're crossing a key bird habitat site. We could also find historical sites that are in the land use plan, fishing areas, camps, things like that. And if we need to, we can drill down even further into the actual documents behind the land use plan so we can find those. As I mentioned, mariner's knowledge is really important. These are some of the locations where there is documented information. And we did that by contracting, again, a lot of Coast Guard captains and just saying, can you help us out here? Giving them forms, looking at things like port manuals and approach. What did you feel about this? Taking pictures of the port approach. What are some of the challenges in this particular area that you might only know because you were the mariner for 20 years? And maybe somebody who's just coming on board might not know that. So let's put that in there. Again, community information, digging down. This is the information for Pond Inlet. Contact information, whether or not there's an airport, hunter and trapper societies, how to get in contact with them to notify them of activities in the area. And again, back to the work that Transport Canada and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans is doing for places of refuge, documenting where those are. And again, getting information from the communities and from the mariners on more information about what it's like, what you need to expect, what services are available in that particular place of refuge, and if available, down to hydrographic charts of the region. Marine safety analysis is another important consideration. This is some work that the National Research Council did a number of years ago, looking at time to rescue. And so this was based on, depending on where your search and rescue assets are placed and the environmental conditions at the time, how long can you expect until rescue? You know, worst case scenario, some places, I think it's really bad if you're up here, it's about 237 days. Oh, sorry, not days, hours, days. Just give up. Would be like the Jeanette. Just, sorry, did I swear? Sorry, so hours, but still, 237 hours is nothing to sneeze at. That's a lot of time. And as was made aware, I think we discussed earlier, a lot of the search and rescue assets are, for now, positioned in the southern parts of the country in Canada. So that's a challenge. And I'm sitting on the panel next, and I'll go on a little rant about search and rescue. And oh yeah, I'll save my rant for after. So anyway, but we can do some calculations. So again, depending on what type of vessel and where your search and rescue capabilities are there other assets in the area from mines, for example, that need to be included? So we can look at that. So one last example, this is the Canada C3 expedition. Some of you may be aware of this. This is Canada's 150th birthday this year. Yay. And the Canada C3 expedition is a great expedition in conjunction with a number of organizations. They're doing 15 legs, coast to coast to coast. I think, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, you probably know, I think it's the Polar Prince that they're on. And which is the X? Yes, yes. This, for a cheap, I know. We could have bought it back. Oh, sorry, Dave is just saying that it's the Polar Prince is an ex-Coast Guard vessel, which Dave would know. And we could have bought it really cheap on eBay a while ago, but we didn't. Or anyone here. Collectively, we were giving it away. So the C3, let's look at a leg of that journey. And we're going to look at leg 9, which is coming up in August, middle of August, through the archipelago. So here's where it's going on that particular leg. And we can pull up, again, if you were the vessel, the captain on board, you could pull up and go, oh, okay, well, what do I need to be worried about up here? Well, there's 2 marine protected areas that you're going by. It's going to be going through 4 shipping safety control zones that it's got to be aware of. There's 21 mariner knowledge reports available for that region, so that's useful. And through the Nunavut Land Use Plan, there are 171 areas identified through community meetings that you need to take into account. So those are all just kind of things that you need to be aware of. So now what if you were actually on board and you wanted to say, okay, well, what else is going to happen? So it says today's ice chart in quotes, because of course this is happening in a month, so we've just pulled off the relevant dates, but from a couple of years ago. So pretend it's today's ice chart. Well, this particular route is passing through 2 ice charts. So we need to stitch those together, and that can be done even if the ice charts were produced on different dates. So that's something we have to look at. And from there, we're using the Canadian Ice Service charts, though they could be used for any data source. We can get things like the ice concentration, stage of development, old ice concentration. If we weren't sure what vessel we were going to use yet, we could look at, okay, if we were doing an ice numeral analysis with a type B vessel, where are we go and no-go areas based on ERA's system? How does that change if it's a type A? How does it change if it's a PC5? And then what if instead of using ERAS, we look at Polaris? How does it change again? So under the Polar Code, how will that affect our ability to transit? We can also look at ice numerals in different ways. So again, for this particular leg, what's the frequency of the ice numeral being greater than 0? So ability, basically a go situation. And again, back to the polar surface temperature, we could come back and look at the particular times we're looking to travel, and will we be in compliance or not with the polar surface temperature, depending on when we're going. So those are just a couple of examples of how the system could be used. So I hope you've got a good idea of the system. We're very pleased with it. It is not yet operational. It is being tested on board the C3, and it has been used on a number of private vessels as well as some Coast Guard vessels recently in demonstration mode. So we're hoping to get it out and operating next year in 2018. And again, I think the point at the bottom really helps summarize a lot of the great work that's been done here. This symposium with other related fora are great ways of bringing together community input, scientific data, and then engineering applications to, again, I hopefully have convinced you that we do have the ability to make shipping safer, greener, and more efficient going forwards. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the CASRAS development team. I just fund the research. I don't do the research anymore. So they are the hardworking people, and especially our partners who have donated a lot of their time to help dry run the system, provide input, help us understand what they need in risk reports as going forward. And again, if you do want to know more about it, you can contact my coworker, Ivana Kubat, who's the project manager, or talk to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Do we have any questions from the audience? Up there. This is an announcement for the audience. After presentation, if you so choose, I'll be happy to answer any questions. This is Commander Mark Miller. I see. Oh, okay. Very good. Good. Thank you. So that's Commander Mark Miller.
The climatological information that goes in the risk assessment, is that based on a long history, many stations, a few stations over a long period of time, or just a short period of time, or a mix? Just curious about that.
It's a mix. It really depends. Most of the information is coming from agencies like Environment Canada, NOAA. It really depends on the station. So some places, ice thickness, for example, there used to be a very regular monitoring program at numerous locations across the Canadian Arctic. That ceased to exist. Now it's coming up a little bit again in very select locations, so sometimes it's intermittent, but you can go and you can query all that information and download it because the system has all the raw data with it. So if you need to find it and look and see its frequency, you can do so.
Thanks. Anyone else? If not, Anne, you know that, Marie? Okay.
Thank you, Anne, for your presentation. In one of your slides, you included what all is going to be done with regards to analysis. Could you just give me an idea of, you had listed local knowledge analysis, just to help me understand that better?
Sorry, when you mean local knowledge analysis, or?
That's what you had listed in one of your slides.
Yeah, so I guess there's a couple of ways. There's local knowledge that was collected. So again, some of the communities filled out forms, again, things like places of refuge, what the impact would be on how using that location as a place of refuge would affect the community. So some of that got brought in. And then some of the, I guess, community analysis is more actually the communities using the tool for their own purposes.
Thank you.
Is it a pressing question? I don't know. You put the sad face, puppy face. No, okay. Give him the microphone. Make it really quick.
We got time. We got time.
Hi. How do you plan on testing usability and documenting or evaluating for effectiveness, such as documenting best practices? And also, is this kind of usability built into the development process?
A little bit, yes. So like I said, at the moment, it's being used by the mariners on board the C3 expedition, and it's been used on a number of Coast Guard vessels already, as well as a couple of private vessels. So again, in this case, it's the mariners providing that feedback in terms of what are they seeing and how is it, I guess, how well is it helping them, especially things like Ice Numeral Polaris, comparing what they see with what's out there. But we've done a lot of work in the past on on the ICE numeral, for example, for Transport Canada, looking at making sure that was robust in the first place. So I guess some of it is we don't know yet until we have a wider range of users. Right now, it's mainly mariners that are using it. It might be very different once we get into the hand of, I don't know, somebody at ABS. You know, they might look at it very differently and say, oh, well, you know, what we need is this, 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 and this, and we won't know until they use it.
Okay, Anna will be part of the panel coming up, so you're no longer my responsibility.
Yes.
You are Helen's responsibility.
Okay.
So we're going to go to a break, and I'll see you 35 minutes past the hour when you can ask Anne more questions. Thank you.